I've got a couple pieces of this super cool forged carbon fiber flexible sheet. I've just made up a pattern and I've got some leather, so I'm going to attempt to make a minimalist style card holder. And I like to do a couple of passes versus trying to cut through in one go, so it's less likely to slip under my cutting edge. Very clean. This is how the pockets are going to line up approximately. So I have a couple of rolled edges to create, and then this is folded in half. We'll start with the easy one. This just has a center fold. I'm wasting the leather so I can make this fold and it'll stay in place. Just plain water. And then I can just press that down to create that fold. This is this piece here, so it needs just a fold at the top. It's going to overlap with the chopped carbon. Then this piece fits into that, and it will be sewn over top. This piece will fit under here, and then these go on top of that. Approximately like that. We'll get the exact alignment later when it's time to stitch. And then both of these halves, this is basically how it's all going to fit together. Let's just pause here for a second because I've been working on half of the wallet and I've discovered a few things so far. The first thing that I did was to attempt to sew this piece onto here with the double rolled edge as I had planned, and I found that it was a bit difficult to get this to lie flat and then get the holes in position the way that I did it, so that was a mistake because this was folded under. It was blocking the holes from, you know, staying in the center, so they wanted to be off the edge of that. So this piece needs to be recut. What I ended up doing was switching to just a single fold. This was just a lot easier to work with. The double fold, it wasn't adding a whole lot to the look, and I just wanted to get this straight as possible and flat as possible because it also starts to get just a bit bulky. This is only half, of course there's going to be another half, so this was already pretty bulky. The next thing that I discovered after I did a good bit of hand stitching was that this sews pretty well with a sewing machine. I had to adjust the tension so that it wouldn't be too baggy at the back, but as I was testing this on some scraps, that is attached quite well. So now I know that I can machine stitch this. That makes it a lot easier. With regards to the hand stitching though, in order to get the holes here, tested a couple of different things. I tried using a couple different tips on the punch, either one that cuts out a small piece or just pokes a hole. And this doesn't really work. It kind of just makes little bits splinter somewhat without getting a good hole. And then I also just tried a sharp nail to see if that would be better, but again, it just didn't make a very good hole. So what I did instead was just drilling the holes. So each of the holes needs to be marked and then drilled, and this was the best way that I found. So I'll go into more detail, show you how that worked out. In retrospect, probably would have been a whole lot easier just to machine stitch this. But since I've already done half of it with the hand stitching, I'm going to do the other half the same way. So I started out with a piece of tape so that I have something on which to mark, since this doesn't really show with the markings very well. Just line that up with the edge. Use my stitching marker. Just need to get the placement for where the line needs to go, which is going to be offset 1/8 of an inch inward from the edge. You can just barely see the stitching marks there, so I'll darken those up with a pen, but I want to make sure that these are lined up with the edges so it's about centered. I don't want to end up with half a stitch space over here or over here. This looks pretty good. Now if it were not centered, all I would need to do is pull up the tape and scoot it over a bit, so that's another advantage of marking onto the tape first. I'm just going to darken up each of these dots with a pen so it's easier to see when I go to drill each of these holes. And of course that is real carbon fiber dust coming off, so you need to handle it accordingly. My alignment isn't perfect since I did this by hand, so with a jig in a drill press, of course, you get much more even results. But the holes have been punched now without causing structural damage. Obviously, if you put them too close together, you'll end up just cutting off this entire piece here or making a very weak point, but I found this spacing to be just fine. Now I need to make the holes in the leather. Wrong side up on the leather, right side up on the carbon. And just mark all of the holes that need to be punched. These can all be punched now using a standard punch. And then same process for the smaller piece. I've got my tape on there. I'm gonna mark out my holes. I just realized that I punched holes for these two pieces together and these two together, but that's backwards. This piece is supposed to go here, and this one here. So I'm just gonna kind of hope that the holes line up well enough to still use these pieces. It didn't end up being a big deal because the spacing is still approximately the same, with some variation due to it being punched by hand one hole at a time. I'm just going to flatten out this stitching a bit. And then I just need to do the same thing for this piece. This is my middle flap piece. I've glued it on just at the base here, so now I need to stitch this to reinforce that seam. You'll see this one looks a little bit darker, a little bit different. The threading is not quite as waxy looking. I just hit it with the heat gun, so I'm going to do the same to this side. Before I start stitching, I've got to remember to radius these edges, so I don't want the corners to be catching on things. I was originally going to just hand stitch all the edges, but now that I know how well the machine sewing works, I'm tempted. Very much tempted to just machine stitch it. However, I don't think my machine can actually even go through that much thickness. That's pretty thick, even with just having a single fold here. Some of these areas are quite thick. So I think in the end hand stitching might be the best way. Okay, looks pretty good. There's contact cement on both edges here. Just getting these edges nice and even, removing any excess glue that was on the outside. I already did a 220 to do the main evening up, and I'm just sort of polishing it with a 400. Last thing I'm going to do is try to burnish these edges a bit, and I'm going to just use some clear shoe polish. I don't know how well this will work, but this is what I had on hand to give a go. Just see how this works. And there's just some carbon dust left on here that I hadn't yet cleaned off, so that's what's coming off on the cloth. And then in here there's some excess black polish from when I was using both on a project. Okay, that seems to be working pretty well. I'm just going to work that in a bit more and polish it up as it starts to dry. 33.79 grams or 1.192 ounces.